on at a regional level, and there's quite a bit to do at the state level. Continuing to implement our Resilient Rhode plan, the power sector transformation, achieving the 1,000 megawatt goal, and working together across Rhode Island on climate change. I feel like when we last met, it was right after the IPCC report, just increased the sense of urgency in terms of the impacts of warming already, given emissions and the rate of change. And we have Ellen McCrae on the phone. We're going to see how this works, because one of the things we wanted to cover just at a really high level was the report that just came out from the federal government, the fourth National Climate Assessment, and that also has gotten a lot of attention. So we'll get to Ellen in a minute and see how that works. I just wanted to mention, and a couple people commented on after the last meeting about the need for better tracking. That's something we completely agree on, so we want to spend some time today on mitigation tracking, what we're already doing, and where we have some challenges, and where we need to look to think more about how, whether it's activities, policies, or actual emissions outputs, how we track on an annual basis. Allison Archambault, who's the lead at DEM on mobile sources, and Reggie, among other things, is going to talk about the inventory that we do on a 3-year basis, and that will be coming out next year. We also are responsible to update our greenhouse gas mitigation plan next year. So a lot ahead in the upcoming year. A suggestion was made also, which I want to follow up on, that we would announce all of our meetings in advance. So I don't have those dates yet, but I'm working with Liz Stone, who does a wonderful job supporting this whole effort, and we will get dates out for all of the meetings in 2019. So both everyone who's on this council and people who want to plan to come will know what those dates are. That is it for my just opening remarks. I want to get into the meat of this meeting. Before I do that, could I ask for, you all have minutes from our last meeting, October 22nd meeting, and we'll ask for a motion and see if there's any comments on those. Second. Any discussion or changes? Okay, then a motion on approving the minutes. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Great. I think we're going to, we asked Sean O'Rourke from the Infrastructure Bank, who's our Chief Resiliency Officer, to give us an update on the Resilient Rhode plan at every meeting. And Sean is going to give us that update, tee up Ellen to make a few comments about the National Climate Assessment, and have a bit of a discussion on the resiliency work before we turn to talking about mitigation. Sean, go right up in front. Welcome.
Thank you, Director Coit. Good afternoon, everybody else. Room looks great.
Thank you.
These shining the boards, I love it. So I'm going to kind of steal the thunder from Ellen McCrae from NOAA, who I'm really thrilled is going to be able to provide a terrific overview of the National Climate Assessment. But in reading through it over the past number of days, I just wanted to highlight a few big takeaways for me, and this is really big picture takeaways. First of all, really encourage everyone to give it a read. For an over 1,000-page document, it's incredibly accessible and incredibly readable. It's also a bit scary, but they do a good job of leading with optimism. There's a number of key takeaways as well as key findings that are really well summarized in each of the chapters. And there is a Northeast-specific chapter that I would particularly encourage everyone to read. The first big takeaway that I had was the science and projections really confirmed the work that we presented inside of Resilient Rhode. The Science and Technical Advisory Board that really advises the EC4, I think, did a tremendous job of pulling together all of the best available science and projections to really guide our statewide work on climate adaptation. So really just want to commend the staff again on the work that they did, really summarizing a tremendous amount of data and information and putting into the beginning of Resilient Rhode. And this NCA report does a great job of, again, emphasizing the need that we need to act now. The second takeaway was the structure of the NCA and the focus on sectors and assets and key messages, again, aligns directly with the way that we structured the Resilient Rhode strategy. And that's No surprise to anybody in the room, consider we have so many co-authors here today. But I think it also reinforces with an additional kind of color commentary really the focus of how we need to move forward here in Rhode Island. And then finally, back to that idea of really the call to action. I was very impressed with the National Climate Assessment and how it focused on planning has been fantastic, but we're at the evolution now of knowing enough that we absolutely have to act now. And again, that directly aligns with our work at Resilient Rhode, and that planning and science needs to back up all of our action on the ground, but really now is the time to be able to move towards implementation. And we're doing that exactly with the Resilient Rhode work. And each of these EC4 meetings, we're going to be highlighting a couple of our implementation highlights, and I'll be teeing up Melinda Hopkins and Laura Bossi from Health in a few minutes. Another update that I wanted to provide is some ongoing work that we're doing, and I say we're, it's the Resilient Rhode team and at the Infrastructure Bank. We're working closely with the U.S. Climate Alliance. The U.S. Climate Alliance is a collection of 16 states and Puerto Rico, where all of the governors from those states have basically said we're still in with the Paris Accord. To become an alliance member, the states have to commit to implementing policies that advance the goals of the Paris Agreement, track and report progress to the global community in appropriate settings, including when the world convenes to take stock of the Paris Agreement, and accelerate new and existing policies to reduce carbon pollution and promote clean energy deployment. Again, directly in line with the governor's priorities. So in service of that major effort of trying to push us forward in terms of aligning with the Paris Accord, there's a number of other sort of side initiatives that the U.S. Climate Alliance is leading on as well. One of those that's particularly relevant to Rhode Island, considering we're now going deep on it, is the Natural and Working Lands Initiative. This initiative started this past summer with a number of national nonprofit groups, including the Nature Conservancy, American Forests, to look at what are the opportunities in the land sector for greenhouse gas reduction and carbon sequestration opportunities. I went down this past summer to DC to participate in a learning lab. Was joined by TJ Boudreau from Department of Environmental Management, as well as Kevin Ruddick from the Nature Conservancy, to see how can Rhode Island really utilize the land sector in service of our climate goals. One of the things we learned really quickly, and this is probably not going to be a surprise to anybody in the room, is that we have a real amazing opportunity on urban forests here in Rhode Island. To think about it as a mitigation goal opportunity, but also an adaptation goal. We think about the multiple benefits that trees provide. So through those couple days in the learning lab, we walked away with some critical next steps. And we had a visit from the CEO of American Forests here a few weeks ago to really confirm our scope of work of identifying, is there an opportunity for us to think statewide about our urban tree canopy coverage? What are some scenarios and maybe some goal setting around what are the mitigation and adaptation opportunities with those scenarios? And then finally, some on-the-ground, municipally led tree planting programs. And so we're applying to the U.S. Climate Alliance for some grant funding to really help us move us forward with that initiative. And I think, just given the topic of the agenda today, urban trees, I think, are a tremendous sort of sweet spot right at the nexus of the mitigation and adaptation conversation. It also ties directly to the U.S. Climate Alliance work that we're doing, ties directly to Resilient Rhode in a couple ways. Urban trees came up in a number of the specified actions from a stormwater point of view, but also on the public health side as well. And Laura did a great job in the Community Health and Resilience chapter on looking at the impacts of urban heat on populations around the state. So again, we're tying directly all of our initiatives directly back to the Resilient Rhode effort. And then finally, highlight a couple of Resilient Rhode initiatives that we already have underway that are being led by our agency partners. And at the last EC4 meeting, we presented all of the new EC4 resilience coordinators. So now we have a resilience coordinator for each of the EC4 member agencies, which are really kind of the point people on leading on resilience efforts for those agencies. And so two of the things that I want to talk about today. The first one is the explicit implementation or integration of the actions inside of Resilient Rhode inside of the statewide hazard mitigation plan. And again, this was a really great collaboration between the Resilient Rhode team and Melinda Hopkins at REMA to really say, hey, we did this really great statewide outreach. We identified within the agencies what are the key priorities. Why don't we elevate that through to a required federal document like the statewide hazard mitigation plan and make sure that they're speaking or singing the same language. I think that's been really critical. And Melinda, do you want to say just a couple words on sort of how that process has been going and maybe why we did this?
We're actually in the process of, because we're updating our state hazard mitigation plan right now, and we should be actually receiving a final draft from our consultant by end of day today for the state review. So that way, once we, all the stakeholders have had a chance to review it, look at all of the actions that have been put into the mitigation plan, along with the resilient Rhode actions that we've combined with, our mitigation actions. So it's all part of our mitigation strategy, which we can utilize to, get some federal funding to do some of the projects that, if there's an avenue for that. So hopefully, once the state reviews it, we can send it up to FEMA for a final review, and they can approve pending adoption, and then we would send it to the governor for her approval, for her adoption, and then it would go back to FEMA for the final approval. So we're pretty close, I think. Probably by mid-February, we should have the final state mitigation plan adopted. I think that highlights an important point, which is this is a coordinating council. And it doesn't mean we can't own some things, but in general, where we're most effective is when the things that we own get embedded and implemented in the specific content areas that we're each responsible for. And that's a great example.
And then another opportunity that we've been progressing, and another example of how we're trying to operationalize climate resilience in all of the work that we do, is through collaboration with Laura Bozzi at the Department of Health, and looking at the really innovative health equity zones, 9 health equity zones around the state. One of the things that we learned really early on was climate resilience and climate change isn't an explicit component of the health equity zones. But they're talking, these community groups are really talking about things that are directly related to climate change. Increasing urban heat, access to public health facilities, right? Those are all having kind of climate change hooks and ties. And is there a way that we can really elevate climate change and resilience as a component of these health equity zones? And so Laura, do you want to talk just for a minute about how we're trying to now infuse climate change into the health equity zone work?
Yeah, so in the Community Health and Resilience chapter of the strategy, one of our main action items was to create these community resilience teams, and the idea was to build resilience and capacity at the local level. So we're doing that through a grant that's allowing us to pilot a program with 3 health equity zones: Central Falls, Newport, and Louisville. So they'll be working together to do an assessment of how climate change is affecting their area and what they can do about it. And then a second part of the funding is to take on an implementation project. There's also a component of a community of practice, recognizing that these are groups that are real experts on health equity and on their communities, but maybe don't know explicitly about climate change. So we're trying to build knowledge within the HESs. And then another part is networking the health equity zones with climate change researchers in the state, so that the knowledge can go and information can go both directions and hopefully inform future research on the academic side.
Thank you. So those are the key updates that I wanted to provide today, and I would look forward to future EC4 meetings being able to kind of highlight some of the agency-specific kind of collaborative efforts that we have going on climate resilience. We'll turn over to Ellen.
And then maybe you can stay nearby, because I want to talk about tracking and dashboards on the resiliency side for a little bit before we turn to the mitigation.
Absolutely. Great.
Ellen, you there?
I am. Hi, guys. I don't know if you guys can hear me, but I'm sorry I can't join you in person. I am in Colorado for one more week of my double-hattedness. But otherwise, you guys know that Rhode Island is fondly in my heart, and thank you guys, both Janet and Liz and Sean, all 3 of you guys, for thinking of having me here. I appreciate it. So I'm not quite sure what you guys have in front of you, and I'm not actually even sure what you guys have in front of you or in the room. So I had asked that perhaps we had the talking points, the key messages for the chapter 18 on the Northeast in front of you. Is that right?
That's
Yes.
correct.
That's correct.
We have those.
Okay. So essentially, I just wanted to go over a little bit on the construct. The construct of NCA4, and I know it's been in the news a little bit about how we were directed in certain ways. But the gist of NCA4, as different than NCA3, is that they really, the leadership at the U.S. Global Change Research Program really encouraged the authors to stop and think about what makes our region most unique. What are the key features, and how is climate manifesting itself in our region? And then to really look at the key messages as the impact first, followed by the science that supports the impacts that we're observing. It is essentially, I mean, when we all figured it out, it worked, but it was a lot of pushback, because in a typical, in the way scientists normally work, we would like to say, this is what we're seeing, this is the evidence for what we're seeing, and this is the impact that you can anticipate. So it was basically turning the key messages, basically reversing the order. So all of the authors at first were like, I don't know how you expect us to do that. We need to talk about increasing temperatures, and people were saying, well, yes, but what does that mean? So anyway, I just wanted you guys to know that, and I think that that's part of the reason why EC4 has gotten a lot of attention, is because it is, as Sean said, very accessible. It starts with a hard hit at the front end about the impacts that we're seeing in our region specifically. So some of the questions that I've received on this are in terms of key message one. What does it mean that New England is going to lose its identity, essentially? And that's not really what we said, but we did say that, a New Englander's sense of place is in large part determined by our proximity to the outdoors and and how we experience, being close to the ocean in Rhode Island and being, and seeing the leaves change, and what does that mean when the outdoors starts to change, and how do we identify with that? And so I think that that's one that the press has really picked up on in recent days when it comes to basically the changing length of our seasons, that we have documented evidence through lots of different things, including leaf out and lilac blooms and shifts in the timing of the leaf season. There are certainly large documents on the National Park Service and how they look at the cherry blossoms in Washington, D.C., for example. So those are all documented to show a change in the number of days earlier that the spring starts, which means a shorter winter season, a longer spring/summer season. And certainly those of us that live near the beaches can understand that folks leave in August for school, and we all know that September is like the greatest month to be on the beach, right? So, and there are reasons for that, and most of it is that the waters are staying warmer longer, and that we're having a longer summer season from the early spring through really the end of September. So that was really key message one, and that impact, trying to think about, all right, what does it mean to have a longer season, and the impact is really to tourism. When you think about folks going to the beach, or folks going to see the leaves, when are the leaves going to change? When's the peak supposed to be? So that's a lot of key message one and the evidence that we're seeing around those changes. Key message two is still about the impact to tourism and commerce and recreation, but it has to do mainly with the ocean temperatures and the impacts to oceans and coastal economies. So that was really what we're seeing, and I think that you guys have this well documented as well. But we were really driving home the impact of warmer ocean temperatures. That there are winners and losers. I mean, beachgoers in September are winners. Migrating fish and migrating mammals like right whales may be struggling against warmer ocean temperatures. We're seeing and had pictures in our report of the daily high tides in Annapolis, Maryland, and certainly in other areas where sea level rise is becoming a visible issue. And so we put that in the key message as well. And then we would be remiss if we didn't talk specifically about the actions that are being taken around sorry, Liz is texting me at the same time here. Hold on. Okay, it says, can we tape your segment? Yes, go ahead. Oh, no, sorry, that was, all right. That's good. Okay. Yes, we're good.
Ellen, this is Janet. We'll probably have to go a little bit quicker. So we have all of the 5 key messages, but we can't spend too much we need to pick up the pace a little bit.
Okay, sorry about that. I wasn't sure how much time I had, so thanks, Janet. So yeah, this is really, I just wanted you guys to see the construct of it and to know that what we were really trying to do is grab an overall sense of the region when it comes to changing seasons, changing ocean and coastal impacts. We did a specific piece on urban impacts because the Northeast is, as you know, well known for our large urban centers and certainly our old cities. So when we got into old cities, we talked about critical infrastructure and our aging infrastructure. And then also the impacts of flooding when it comes to the city's infrastructure. We were encouraged to and added a key message on health, sort of a bit late in the game, but we have two incredible health experts, including one from Rhode Island with Greg Wallenius from Brown. And the work that Greg and others have done in public health, noting that nighttime temperatures over 75 make New Englanders really hot, which shocks people in the Southeast, but it's our deal in the Northeast. So we have longer heat waves, we have more 90-degree days, we have more extremes, not only in too hot, but also to the very cold. You guys have certainly seen that it doesn't rain the way it used to. We have documented, those changes, especially on the shoulder season. And the last thing was really acknowledging Rhode Island specifically, among other states, New York, New Jersey, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and others that, as you guys are looking at your hazard mitigation plan, thinking about blending in the climate impacts to that is what the state of Massachusetts did, and I think you guys are also exploring that as well. And so, documenting that in policy, I think is exactly where EC4 is going. And you guys have been leading the way on this. I can't remember when EC4 was formed, but it's been a while, and I think you guys have made some great strides. And so we really wanted to acknowledge the work that the states have done in our region that we think is unique to the Northeast and is not necessarily what other states around the country are doing. Some are, but not as many as ours. So that's the gist of how the report was put forward, and we arrived at our key messages with a lot of public input through a process that started a year and a half ago, or maybe a little bit longer ago, when we were asking people how they experienced climate and what was most important and impactful to them. And I think what we're seeing now in terms of where you guys are headed in the future, I like the idea of thinking about tracking and metrics, and I hear that will be part of your discussion today. I think it's really important that we move from planning to implementation, and it sounds like that's also where you guys are, and how you document that improvement. I can say I've seen a lot of changes in the private sector as well, looking at assessing their own vulnerabilities, their supply chain analyses, and making sure that this information becomes used by them as they move out on making themselves more resilient in their own supply chains and private sector stuff. So that's also an important move that we're seeing. And speaking of private sector, one more thing, and that is a lot of states are moving, having done your plans, are moving towards finding funding to implement those plans. And certainly Sean, coming out of the infrastructure bank, understands that and has partnered up with some that he was telling you about earlier. And I would also encourage you guys to look at some of these new venture capital areas that, there's one in Washington, D.C. now, and others that are looking at pairing with banks to look at bond ratings, and others. Moody's has been involved in that as well. So I'm starting to see that the states are going to be successful with obtaining funding to move out on these plans. So that's also an exciting new turn for us.
Thanks, Ellen. Did you want to stay on the phone as we move down with our meeting, or if there's anyone on the council who has a particular question or comment for Ellen? Ellen, did you want to stay on the phone, or if you
I'm happy to take questions if you guys want. I can stay on for a little while. I'm not sure. I don't have a copy of the agenda, so I'm not sure if I would be useful for the remainder of the discussion or what's best.
I don't think. I would just make the comment that 2 years ago, our Science and Technology Advisory Board did a report that's got all the scientific information on these types of things and more. And I think the only thing striking about this report is, in some ways, is that the Trump administration put it out. So I think it really reinforces. It talks about the work that's been done in Rhode Island on health. It references really specific things that are going on at the states. And I think one of our key questions will be on the funding side, whether the federal government will continue to fund some of this, either under the auspices of resiliency work or otherwise. But I'm not asking that as a question to you necessarily.
Right, and I think just in response to the comment on this administration, I think that we have to keep in mind that this is the 1990 Global Change Research Act, and we have a mandate to put this out every 4 years to inform the Americans at all levels. So it is not necessarily a political document, or it's not designed to be, but instead it's designed to inform, regional, state, local levels to the kinds of changes that we are experiencing and will continue to experience. So I think that's the intent. I guess my one question back to you guys, which I think is going to come up in the next assessment, and that is, what is most useful to you? So Sean said, this is over 1,000 pages long. There's a lot of discussion about whether we should focus more on the regional impacts and embed all of the different sectors, or whether we should focus more by sector and then ask you guys to read each of the sectors. So I guess I would ask, for those of you that have seen the report, if either one is more useful than the other, or if the construct of having both gives you, so I'm just curious about that feedback.
Why don't you let us give you feedback? I think unless someone's got something burning to say, that's feedback we can give you later, and we can send it to you through Sean.
That sounds great. Yep, I'd love to talk to Sean more. Thank you for introducing us about a year ago now, Janet, and I look forward to talking with you guys more.
Great, thanks, Ellen. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. So just quickly on the funding, I just wanted to mention, and I'm not sure if I even did it, on the front end, that the Green Economy Clean Water Bond passed by almost 79%. And I think, certainly in my memory, that is the highest tally for any bond measure that I've seen. And it includes lots of funds that are relevant to resiliency, specifically $10 million in both the funding for coastal and riverine adaptation and resiliency work, and the funding for the wastewater treatment facility risk mitigation work. But the other pots of money around other elements of it are also related. So that is one source of funds. And we'll be working with CRMC and RIB and others to put together the regulations that provide the funding for that. And I think we want it as much as we can. I mean, I won't belabor again the wonderful wastewater treatment facility vulnerability assessment, but we want these to be not ad hoc, but to be related to vulnerability assessments and careful work about the most strategic places to put these funds. So we'll be working on regulations which will have a public input process, but that's one source of funding. Sean, I just wanted to mention, so we're going to turn to mitigation shortly, but we've talked somewhat, and you have, about how we represent progress on resiliency in a dashboard, because I think, I envision one EC4 dashboard with a resiliency part and a mitigation part, and as you mentioned, many things are cross-cutting. So maybe that doesn't even work. But how far along have you and your team come on taking a look at that aspect?
Yeah, thank you. So we've done a bit of work on how do we demonstrate the progress that we've been making on the Resilient Rhode effort. We have a framework right now, and I won't get into too much of the details because we will be meeting with the EC4 resilience coordinators in the middle of this month, and a big topic of that meeting is going to be on how do we track the implementation of Resilient Rhode. The first one right off the top is that we have 61 actions. Are we on track, not on track? The big question there is, well, how do we define on track, not on track? And so for each of those actions, we're going to be coming up with 1, 3, 5, and 7-year goals. And we might refine those time limits based on whatever the team comes up with. And those are going to be action specific and owned by the resilience coordinators. And those will kind of be red light, green light for the are we on track, not on track. Some key metrics across the actions, so some things that we've come up with, and we've also surveyed over 100 potential metrics from other states as well as cities of how they're tracking their adaptation plans. Dollars invested, municipalities served, acres conserved, those sorts of things. And then third, that I'm particularly excited about, is an idea that came up in our previous meeting, was how do we highlight the success stories of Resilient Rhode as well as other initiatives that are going on, and really put that out in the forefront. So tying specific projects or initiatives to a location, say on a GIS map that can then be loaded up on our website, to say, hey, look at all these great projects we're doing, what's a little bit of a project description, to really highlight the work that we're doing, so it isn't just a blurb or a paragraph, but it becomes a little bit more illustrative. So those are kind of the three key areas that we're looking at, and a lot more to come after the team reconvenes.
I think as we continue to develop tracking and metrics around mitigation, we want to keep those coordinated conversations because one, and I know that's part of the plan, some are just, policies. Did we get this adopted through a regulation? Did we get this adopted through a statute? And we have those on both sides.
Yep. And a big part of this too, we were also looking at things that we're already tracking as sort of the tier 1 filter, and then how do we take those things we're already tracking and then actually be able to then display those so everybody can see, and then figure out the other information that we want to get to start with.
I'd just say, I think that's great, and as we think about the mitigation tracking, I think just working together on that would be really, really helpful. I really agree that telling the stories is a huge piece of it, but it needs to be complemented with the action tracking and the outcomes tracking and the policy tracking. So if we can work together on moving that forward, I think it'll really help both of us.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other comments or questions for Sean? And we can certainly get back to this during the public comment period. You'll be here, right?
I will.
Okay, thanks, Sean.
Thank you.
So now I want to turn, I believe Nick has the clicker. Do you? Okay. Nick, I'll let you handle it if you're willing. So it's really important to look at progress we've made on mitigation and then to talk about how areas that need more focus and attention, how we're going to track progress. I know that Timmons and some other folks have really specific ideas or hopes for how we do this and have been willing to look at how other places are doing it and make recommendations. So I know we'll be hearing from some others. But right now I wanted to go through kind of what we've done to date and talk about areas where we can track progress and areas where we're struggling to do it. And I think I just want to say at the outset that this is an area where I think we aspire to have a very clear dashboard. I looked at what other states have. In general, it's hard to get up-to-date emissions tracking on a year-to-year basis. And so many of the other states have something more similar to what we have, which is sort of a lagging way of looking at the emissions-wide greenhouse gas emissions and then some more specific metrics. But we want to figure out what's the very best that we can do, what can we provide now, and then where do we still need some work. So this is kind of an overview, and then we're going to get into some of the sectors. I just want to remind everyone, these are the targets in the Resilient Rhode Island Act. I know there's some concern that they're not stringent enough, and people have opinions about the targets and the way, but that just wanted to remind people those are the targets. And the greenhouse gas reduction plan that we did 2 years ago, almost exactly, is based around those targets. When we did that, we contracted with NESCOM to help us do the modeling that we based the analysis on. And it really was more of a framework. I mean, the plan and the policy and implementation options were set out. And I think that going forward, in 2019, we want to really look at how do we implement on some of the areas where we're having challenges. How do we implement these options for achieving target reductions? So whatever you think the reduction percentages should be, we want to move aggressively in that direction. Next slide. I think I already said most of this. So I'll just say that for the 2050 in general, we talked about the time, the need for really innovation, transformation, technologies and approaches that we may not even have going now. So we were kind of celebrating progress to date and realizing that we really needed to double down, figure out dramatic new ways of doing things to hit these targets. Just wanted to remind folks, I think this is really important. This is from the greenhouse gas reduction study. What we want is a smaller pie. So So this is all of the emissions in Rhode Island at the time of the study. We want a smaller pie. We want to see it get smaller and smaller, but we also are going to notice as we take action that the different pieces shift in relative size. So even since the time I've been in my position as DM director, the transportation piece of the pie has grown in relation to the other pieces of the pie. So we have made progress on reducing greenhouse gas emissions from our electric sector. We have made very little progress in the transportation sector. So while we want to keep aggressively working on each, and we've made very little progress on the heating sector, which we're calling residential and commercial there. So I just want to point that out because I think that in 2019, really focusing on the transportation sector is something that we're going to need to do to make that pie smaller. I think we can continue to make the electric consumption piece smaller and smaller, and then we're just going to see transportation become a bigger percentage of the problem. I introduced Allison earlier. I'm going to ask Allison to take us through the next few slides. So we want to focus a bit on transportation. And Meredith Brady, who's the head of our planning branch, is also going to kind of co-lead this discussion.
Yeah, so a few different people are going to jump in throughout this discussion. But as we're taking a look at mitigating our transportation emissions, we heard loud and clear during our TCI listening sessions that the state needs to do a better job of portraying our successes and our emission reduction goals. Aside from what we heard on different policy action items, that sort of thing that we've heard, we have a lot to do in this section. So internally, we took a look at what we're tracking, what we know, what we don't know, what do we need. Those out there may have information that we don't have available, and how we can make progress. And we're certainly looking to open up the conversation at the end on how we can do so. So keeping in mind that reducing the transportation sector emissions comes through various policies and programs and implementation through our changes to the vehicles that we use, the fuels, and land use. We're also trying to develop alternatives to traditional modes of transportation, increasing deployment of our zero-emission vehicles within our state lines and region-wide, strengthening the resiliency of transportation infrastructure as the climate changes, and also we're keeping in mind the equity. So we're making sure any decisions that are being made will protect vulnerable groups and populations.
This is probably a good time for me to step in and talk a little bit about some of the plans that we have that we're working on. You've heard me talk about a lot of different plans and how they all connect before. I think the timing on this is excellent in a lot of ways. We have our long-range transportation plan, which we had put a hold on so we could coordinate it better with our other plans, such as the transit master plan, which is beginning to move forward next week, as a matter of fact. I know I'm probably stealing a little thunder here, but on the 11th and 12th, there will be 3 public sessions on the transit master plan, which we look forward to having hopefully everybody participate in. There's a noontime one in Providence on Tuesday. There is an evening one Tuesday in Woonsocket, and an evening in Newport on Wednesday evening. That's the 11th and 12th. But that's just one piece of the plans as we're putting them together. And our long-range transportation plan itself, one of the requirements from the federal government at this point is for us to be data-driven and have performance measures. So how do we look at greenhouse gas as an issue in the long-range transportation plan, and how do we measure it? Right now, there's some very traditional methods that we can use, but we're looking at other ways that we can, in fact, track and measure the reduction in greenhouse gas from mode shift in vehicles, from changes in transportation behaviors, from technologies that may change the way that we look at transportation. The other night at our Transportation Advisory Committee, we asked 3 questions, one of which was how people view themselves traveling in the next 20 years. And there were not a lot of people saying, I'm just going to take my car like I do today. There were a lot of people talking about different modes of transportation moving forward. So that's something good to know. That's something that's critical to putting our plans together. And after we've tackled this long-range transportation plan, Division of Planning will be tackling Land Use 2050. We have Land Use 2025. And land use also speaks to how we're going to be getting places and how we're going to develop moving forward. So these are all things that work into this overall picture. Thank you.
So an important step in being able to calculate our greenhouse gas emissions from our transportation is our ability to characterize our existing fleet. This is done through using our DMV registry data, our state fleet database, and also some other reports. Within that, we're identifying activities within each vehicle class. There we're able to look at VMT, engine hours, fuel consumption across the sector, not only vehicle speeds per road use, a lot of little things that go into identifying those activities. And then ultimately applying an emissions factor for each pollutant and using our modeling and analysis tools. So here at DEM we use the state inventory tool, the EPA's SIT tool, and also EPA's MOVES modeling analysis for on-road transportation greenhouse gas tracking.
Allison, when you do going back, I know we're working on our 3-year overall emissions report. On what basis, at what time frame is this done?
So this is a little bit of lag. So we are completing our 2014 inventory currently. We are going to be able to do 2015 early next year. And the lag in that is due to we're waiting on publicly available reports for us to pull data from. And that's kind of standard across the board within other states.
Which is why when I look at all the other states, they're always 2 or 3 years behind because they're looking at this data to be available to plug in the model.
So if we're looking kind of high level progress and tracking, we can take a look at some programs that we've implemented and are working on here in Rhode Island. So you can see some of the pictures up here, RIPTA's ZEV deployment, our state fleet penetration, ZEV penetration, and also tracking our zero emission vehicles here within our state, our long range transportation plan, and being able to identify VMTs along with that, our alternative fuel infrastructure, and how that's being developed, and how we can better utilize biodiesel here within our state. Feel free to jump in, anyone, if you want to add to anything now.
Lily, you want to add? I'll just mention we got our first tranche of funding through the VW settlement, and we really, I think, are a leader of the pack in terms of states making use of that funding. And so that's a picture of the beautiful zero-emission vehicle bus that's being tested.
So certainly we can track the progress being made with numbers, how many zero-emission buses are implemented into the RIPTA fleet, and then being able to also implement that into the analysis and modeling that we do here at a inventory-wide, transportation inventory-wide level. So kind of also some questions that came up, what we don't know, what do we need, and then how do we make progress on these various fronts. So one of the unknowns in the area of alternative fuel infrastructure, and there may be people in this room that may be able to help us feed some information into some of these unknowns. Right now, we don't have an emissions factor associated with our alternative fuel infrastructure build out. So we can certainly show numbers and tracking on how we're covering the state of Rhode Island with our infrastructure, but sometimes it's difficult to do that emissions factor and show our greenhouse gas reduction progress. Also, one of the data sources that we use for fuel is EIA's diesel and heating oil, and that tracks how much is sold at the rack and not specifically how much may stay in our state or is transferred out of our state. So that's something that when we try to model and analyze that data, we're going to take on some assumptions when looking at that. We're also continuing to explore how we create our own Rhode Island specific data. So as Janet brought up before, we're 2 to 3 years behind, not behind, but we're waiting for certain reports to get out. Right now, I'm having someone take a look at our MOVES modeling, specifically around on-road transportation, and if Rhode Island can develop our own inputs for that modeling. In the past, we've used consultants to develop those inputs for us. So some of those things are, we need to know VMTs, vehicle classifications, road speeds, meteorological data, and some other inputs. And I think at the state, that's something that's being addressed right now through a different working group out of planning that involves different entities across all of our agencies.
We're working hard to develop an actual data center in division of planning so that a lot of this data becomes more locally available. When we need it, we can pull it down, or at least we know where we're pointing to. That's part of the problem is now we get around the table and start talking about what we need and nobody knows where to get the data. So making sure we at least know where the data is available becomes really critical.
And do you have that BMT data? Well, no, we have it. What's the extent in terms of roads, major roads, state roads, that people can collect that data from? How do you go about getting that? That's probably too big a question.
No,
I can't quite visualize how you get it.
Yeah, it's largely done on the basis of vehicle counts. That's something that's done through the Department of Transportation right now. So I need to talk about it while Julia's out of the room, but it's something that's done generally through the Traffic Safety Division or in conjunction with projects. And it's been the information that they've been retrieving has not necessarily been done in the same places on an annual basis. And we're trying to come up with a more targeted method of developing and retrieving that data. The major highway network has a lot more reliable and the intervals between counts there are typically smaller, so making sure that we're getting counts for a larger network of roads is very critical. Some of the new data that they have now, though, some of the data we're looking to tap from sources that track cell phones, for example, can at least tell you where the vehicles are going, and there is some way of taking that and looking at if someone is going between here and here and the speed limit is X, and these are the miles that they can travel. So there'll be some way of extrapolating some of the data that we get from those sources back into the FTA.
And averages like that go into our MOVES modeling analysis when we do that run.
And MOVES, capital MOVES, is the name of the name of the model. Yeah, okay, just so people know.
I know we can track the number of alternative vehicles and the number of alternative vehicles, but can we also track the relative number of sedans versus SUVs? That's some concern that even as those vehicles become more efficient, that we're not necessarily, we may be shifting overall to larger vehicles. And is that
we can track that using DMV data. From the end of next year, it will only get better. They made an update at DMV this past year on how to track the certain classifications of vehicles and making sure their input is correct in their database. But we do have a relative number that we're able to track based on light duty, certain vehicle weight classifications, that sort of thing. And then we also need to keep in mind that we're looking for reliable scientific data and also stay aligned with our regional and state partners who are also doing emissions inventory. We don't want to do something way completely different than Massachusetts or Connecticut because we're all ultimately feeding into a similar goal. And then some things that we don't know what's going to roll out is unknown federal support of major programs to advance different technologies that we need to meet our greenhouse gas reduction goals.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I have the pleasure of talking a little bit about the electric sector, and I think what's clear, and I think Janet made this point earlier, is that we have been able to demonstrate some progress, not enough. We still have a lot of work to do, but some progress in the electric sector over the past many years because we've had a suite of policies, programs, initiatives, tools at our disposal, particularly here in Rhode Island, where I think we've had some ambitious goals that have allowed us to begin shifting the emissions count within the specific sector. We haven't had that same benefit in the transportation and thermal sectors. So we'll walk through a few slides. We went back and looked at the plan, at some of the major mitigation options that were listed there, as well as complementary focus areas and a call for leveraging multi-state collaboration activities. And I think that we've made progress over the past year or two in each of these categories. We'll walk through briefly, which should give us I think some positive energy heading into 2019, but a reminder that we still have a lot of work to do. So on efficiency, we remain a national leader on implementing innovative energy efficiency programs We recently announced again to be third in the nation, which is great, although we want to be number one, working toward that goal. We have a 3-year energy efficiency plan that was released. We're heading into the 2nd year of that plan. That calls for about 7.5% reduction in electric consumption and about 3% reduction in gas usage statewide. That's very significant. We're making great progress there. We're also using that plan to begin implementing in other areas of the economy, such as shifting from oil-based or gas heat to high-efficiency electric heat pumps. And so we'll have a slide on that in a moment, but we're trying to leverage this opportunity here in our innovation that we've been able to demonstrate in energy efficiency to tackle some of the issues in the thermal sector, which is another third of that emissions pie we saw earlier.
Nick, I just want to highlight, because I think people get inured to things that they've heard over and over. Rhode Island should be so proud to be the 3rd in the nation on energy efficiency. That is extraordinary. It reflects how we've invested our Reggie dollars and our state laws, and I mean, that is one of the most important things we can do. And I just
And changing markets, changing consumer behavior, so that when you go into a Home Depot or a Lowe's now, the first aisle you walk into is the LED light bulb aisle. I noticed that when I go to shopping. That hasn't always been the case, and so we're changing the way people think, and that's good. That's good for energy consumption across all 3 sectors. We're also calculating and accounting for GHG benefits associated with those programs and creating value opportunities there. And as I mentioned, we're looking in this current 3-year cycle on how do we address some of the challenges in the oil and propane sector, how do we bring energy efficiency more effectively to low and moderate income customers who might otherwise be shut out from some of those opportunities. Accelerating clean energy adoption. So again, I think we've had some great success stories in 2018, heading into 2019 with more work to do. The Governor announced her 1,000 megawatt goal. And in recent months, you've seen announcements on a selection of a 400 megawatt offshore wind farm. That wind farm, which still will need the contract needs to be filed, receive Public Utilities Commission approval, but it offers the potential to generate enough electricity for 20 to 25% of the state's annual demand. That is significant. We also recently closed, working with National Grid, on a 400 megawatt request for proposals for other renewable energy types, more traditional, solar, wind. Those bids are in, and we're starting an evaluation process for that activity, and we'll see what shakes out of that later in 2019. But again, 2 very significant drops in the bucket in just a short time frame.
And Nick, I just want to point out that if you look at the lower right corner, as we work toward the tracking and figuring out where the data sets are that we can use that are reliable and consistent, this has been a good exercise. So this has been sort of a starter project for us to say, how do we put together a dashboard that everyone can see on a quarterly basis where we actually are, not what we announced we were going to do, not what we hope to do, but where we actually are. And I hope the learnings out of that we can use on some other dashboards, just to be sure that it may not have all the answers to every question, but we know that there are data that we can live with and the public can count on, and they will be there each quarter. So it has taught us a lot, I think. It is on both our website and hopefully linked, so you can find it on EC4 as well.
That's right. We're providing that update quarterly on our website and through our newsletter. And as you can probably tell, those 2 big initiatives that I just mentioned, the recent request for proposals and the offshore wind announcement, are obviously not included in that chart. They won't be until those contracts have been approved by the Public Utilities Commission. And then locally, we're leveraging the success that we've had in some of our renewable energy programs, particularly Renewable Energy Growth and the Renewable Energy Fund, to accelerate adoption here at home. So we've increased the amount of capacity for residential solar. We recently announced through the Renewable Energy Fund a incentive program for development of solar on brownfields. So we're always looking to take the tools that we have and improve them to generate the sorts of outcomes that we discuss here at EC4. More work to do, but get good progress. One of the key factors in the 2016 emissions plan was to enable communities and complementary areas of focus, and one of them was clean energy jobs growth. So in our last jobs report earlier this year, we demonstrated 72% growth in this sector since 2014. Pretty substantial. The offshore wind project that I just mentioned is anticipated to generate more than 800 jobs. So that's not included here, but I think the activities, the programs that we just mentioned that look at renewable energy opportunities both here at home and across the region are creating real economic opportunity for our workforce, and I know that we're excited about that. More dynamic utility. Maggie, feel free to jump in at any time. This is something that the division has helped lead the state on, working with National Grid and many other stakeholders. But we spent a lot of time in 2017, I think it was, analyzing how do we foster a more dynamic utility and regulatory model to foster and facilitate the sorts of outcomes that we want as a state. Being able to better manage our electric demand and our energy usage so that we can be more energy efficient. How do we integrate storage and new clean transportation solutions into the electric grid? And we went through a lot of that work, and in parallel to that, the utility filed a rate case, which was recently concluded. You may have seen it in the news. The short of it here for this group is that out of that settlement came some initiatives regarding electric vehicle charging infrastructure and new energy storage opportunities for the state, and really help develop the sorts of tools and foundational infrastructure that we will need to really take advantage of a 21st century electric grid. Becky, anything else?
No, I think you got most of the main points. I mean, I think one of the interesting opportunities for renewables overall is that the wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine, and many people think of that as a risk, but it's actually a huge opportunity. And if we leverage the existing technology in the right way, we could both essentially transform our generation capacity to renewable and at the same time reduce overall costs to ratepayers. That's part of it. So I'm really excited about it.
Okay. Another.
I just want to ask a question. I think mostly to Mackie. In terms of when we're tracking things, so we've been talking about activity metrics and outputs, how do we track progress in that area?
In terms of carbon avoided, I think it's an allowing mechanism more than it is a driving mechanism of avoiding carbon. The outputs of it are likely to be, you should see, it allows you to connect renewables at lower cost, and also for electric vehicles, the charging infrastructure. Again, it changes the business model for them.
So it's more maybe whether we've adopted policies, whether we've implemented rather than an output of reduction.
It's not there aren't outcome metrics to drive carbon. They will allow your other metrics, will juice your other metrics basically.
Another initiative that I think we've talked about here before this group is our Lead by Example initiative, which is helping improve the sustainability and efficiency of government energy systems. So just a couple of highlights here. The governor challenged us a few years ago to reduce energy consumption of state government by 10%. By the end of this current fiscal year, we're on track to meet that goal. We just closed a bid window for a 5-megawatt solar project in Exeter on state-owned land. We're reviewing those bids now. We've put solar panels up on the rooftops that you can see there across from the State House, Department of Administration, DOT, and Health. We're going through a lot of state buildings and improving energy efficiency, HVAC systems, lighting. And if you've driven down the highway over the last few years, you've seen that virtually all of the streetlights on the major arteries, 95, 295, and other state roads, have been switched out from those old high-pressure sodium lights to LEDs, significantly slashing the amount of energy consumption that the state has to, the state uses and pays for from streetway lighting. So again, more work to do, lots of opportunity left for us, but we're making headway.
On that too, didn't you, Carol, when you started, collect all the data to ensure that we could track energy consumption by state agencies?
Yes, we centralize it so that we have, and we're now putting in software to make it information that's more available to the agencies so that agencies themselves can change their behaviors as they watch what happens with their energy consumption. So both centralizing it and probably more importantly, putting the software in 2019 will help everybody continue to drive this down.
Because I feel like, just like I like on my bill when I get a big smiley face, which I always do, you know, I think we should be, when we're tracking, have something like that for the state agencies to see how you compare with your neighbors.
And the final point of the plan regarding the electric sector was to engage in regional collaborations. We won't spend any time here. Reggie is something we've talked about at length here before this group in the past. Rhode Island's still an active member of that entity, and I think we've demonstrated a lot of progress in reinvesting the dollars that come out of that program back into the clean energy economy here in Rhode Island. Another example is, as we mentioned, that offshore wind project. That came out of a collaboration with us and our friends in Massachusetts. So we are working across state lines, trying to achieve common goals, and out of that drive cost efficiencies and new opportunities that acting on our own we might not otherwise achieve.
I wanted to mention here, Sean mentioned the U.S. Climate Alliance, which Rhode Island is part of, and its goal to exceed the Paris goals by states working together. So I just want to mention that both New Jersey and Virginia are on track to join RGGI, or going through a public process now. So we're expanding the footprint of that regional effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the electric generating sector.
The thermal sector is not as many slides, and that's because we have, again, we haven't created that sort of policy program framework to really achieve the outcomes that we know we need to achieve in order to hit our GHG emission reduction targets. The plan talks about electric heat and biofuel opportunities. As I mentioned earlier, as we head into 2019, we're going to be doing some more of that work, working in coordination with National Grid on the electric heat opportunities. We also have posted, it's available on our website, a stretch code for residential and commercial infrastructure. That was part of the governor's charge to us a couple of years ago, and we achieved that goal. So that's available for new construction. But I think broadly speaking, we haven't really cracked this code yet. I don't know if many jurisdictions in the country have either. And then measuring progress, I think like many of the stakeholders here in the room, we're thinking as well about how do we best demonstrate progress, positive or negative, across these different sectors. We had a slide earlier on transportation as well. Here's a couple of ideas, but we'll throw it back to Janet for some more discussion about that.
Yeah, I wanted to stop on this slide and have some discussion amongst our group, and then we'll quickly do some announcements and have some public comment and input from folks with their ideas. These are some next steps that Liz and I with the group were brainstorming, and I think to me these all are fairly obvious and high level, but have a lot of meat to them, in some cases that we really need to work on. So Carol's leading the acceleration of the clean energy initiatives in the electric sector. We should talk more about transportation and the thermal work, trying to get our arms around it, and I'd like to talk a little bit more now. I know there's several members of this Science and Technical Advisory Board here. Hal, Timmons, Jim, I'm sure if there's others. I was going to send down up a specific assignment, because as we've gotten together and looked at these options for tracking and developing metrics on the mitigation side, we feel like we need help as a state coming up with what's the best way of doing this in a meaningful time frame where we can track how we're doing. I mentioned we do a pretty detailed 3-year assessment, but we want to have, Carol was talking about the quarterly basis on which she's looking at the 1,000 megawatt goal. In order to really have something more meaningful to people, we want to do something at least on an annual basis. And so we want to get some recommendations back from the staff and to work with you and maybe the students on how do we create metrics in a dashboard. And that is a goal. I think it can be a work in progress. We already have some things that we can report on regularly with transparency. But so I wouldn't not do a dashboard because it wasn't economy-wide. And in some cases, it will even be policies or activities where we're seeing headway. But in terms of really tracking our emissions and from each of the sectors, that's a difficult challenge to do meaningfully. So these are some of the things that I think are our next steps, and just wanted to invite some conversation among the council before we go to the public comment.
If I can, on item number 1, I think a subcategory of that needs to be storage. And as Mackie just said very clearly, there's opportunity when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. We're making, fairly good progress on getting more solar arrays and renewable energy, but I haven't seen anything in terms of large-scale storage, so that this we're not just feeding electricity into the grid, but also storing electricity so it can be used at night. If we're really going to electrify and decarbonize our systems, we really have to be thinking about large-scale lithium battery or other technology electric storage.
And I would just underscore that. I completely agree with you, and I think that in the mantra of all of our energy in all of these sectors being clean, affordable, and reliable, the cost curves in storage are beginning to come down, which will allow us to think about how to do that cost effectively, which is really important to the people of Rhode Island, that we don't have to be the first to do it and the most expensive, but I think the cost curves are beginning to come down so that we can implement pretty quickly, which I would love to do.
Right, and I think a prime example was done in Australia recently with that Tesla battery bank. I don't know, every gigawatts or something. It's phenomenal.
Although there's two ways to think about that. There's the procurement side and the deployment of large-scale storage, and there's the other part which we're going to talk about. In addition to that, there's a transportation component to storage as well.
Yeah.
So there's, as storage comes down, the major driver of storage cost reducing is actually the increase in use in transportation of lithium. And so the opportunity to use charging assets for fleets and for charging stations as essentially balancing for the grid could significantly reduce both the cost of grid storage and the need for large-scale grid storage, since we've got batteries driving around all over the place already, whether they're on buses or on cars. So that's something we've been really focused on. It's, again, Jen, to your earlier point around, like, we do this kind of nerdy work behind the walls in the utility transformation, but it actually can save you a bunch of money on a bunch of other places.
One thing I noticed is missing on that, and Sean mentioned it, is sequestration through forests and land use. And that's something that Meg and Grossmart and others have talked about, potentially even having an ad hoc committee. This group, I don't know how we approach it, but I'd like to make sure it was in our plan at a high level that we measure forest sequestration or other types of habitats and kind of track if we do an urban forestry initiative, that could be number of trees planted. I'm not sure what the metric will be, but I want to make sure that's part of our mitigation discussion. Others on the next steps on this. We do have, under the Resilient Rhode Island Act, a requirement to update our greenhouse gas reduction plan in 2019. So working on a plan for how we do that is something that we're going to be turning to very quickly. Okay. Well, I will quickly ask this group if you have any announcements or updates, and then I'd like to open it up for public comment. In particular, hoping to talk that we hear from people, obviously on anything, but on the tracking and the metrics most interested in. Julia.
Yeah, so I'm going to stand because I just want to make sure people in the back can hear too. We just had a big announcement go out this afternoon while we're all sitting here actually. So Rhode Trip Mobility Challenge, which is connected really to everything we're talking about around electric vehicles and mobility choices and getting people into transit. So the Trip Mobility Challenge is a project that we've been doing for about the past year, looking at all of the different factors around our transportation sector, electrification, electric vehicles, new technologies, autonomous technology, and how it integrates into our system, and working with the city of Providence and Rhode and a lot of other partners. So we just selected a company out of Ann Arbor, Michigan. They're called May Mobility. They offer small, low-speed electric autonomous transit vehicles, and they will be offering a free transit service for a year out these windows, actually, right in the Woonasquatucket corridor, so connecting the train station all the way to Olneyville Square. This is a very exciting project. It's focused on research, so working with our higher ed partners and others to really think about how do we as a state and all of us at the table and our partners, sort of really think deeply about what's happening in our transportation sector and what do we need to learn. That was a good time. But what do we need to learn here in Rhode Island to both inform policy and how we create our system moving forward? So this is a very exciting project, and I'm sorry I had to step out in the middle of the transition, but it was because we have a lot of press calls coming in. But we're really excited about this. I think we'll be having a lot of conversations with all of you and the public about what we're doing and how this is going to unfold. So I wanted to let you know. So you got the first word on it.
Great.
Thank you.
Get it out, Alex.
They're already calling.
And other comments or announcements? Jeff?
A couple things. Last week we closed our first efficient building fund bond transaction in the public bond market. It was roughly $20 million in funds, a total portfolio of about $32 million worth of loans to municipalities and other quasi-state agencies for energy efficiency and renewables. It's roughly 70-30 efficiency renewables. It was designated a green bond, and we actually got it rated by S&P in their green rating, and we received the highest rating, E1. Very positive comments about the governance and transparency of the program, frankly. It's still new for them, so we were teaching them about closing loans at the same time you close the bonds, because many other green bonds need to fund projects after the fact. This is the first one they've looked at where it's actually funding projects simultaneously. Interesting comments that they didn't give us as high as scores we would have expected on the efficiency and renewable efficiency, actually, because there just isn't enough coal-fired production in New England.
Sorry, man.
And so the mitigation impact was not as great as one would have thought. But again, we still scored very high, and we got the highest rating. And frankly, that helped us get some new investors in, and really the bonds traded. Same rating as the state from a credit point of view, but we traded through their outstanding bonds. So, the transaction overall, we've financed projects in 13 different communities, although some communities have done a couple of rounds already. We're looking forward to the next one. We're going to be closing a transaction in the next couple of months with Situate, both schools and public sector buildings, and we're really looking at what we can do in the school space. And the recognition of Rhode Island globally, we've also been admitted as the first non-founding member to the Green Bank Network. It's a network of green banks that predominantly are involved in energy. And so it's Connecticut, New York, UK, Japan, Australia, Malaysia, and those were the founding members. We're the first non-founding member to the recognition of what we're doing here in Rhode Island, a global platform. They had their Congress in Shanghai, so that was interesting to ride the only magnetic levitation train in the world from the airport to the financial district. Going 300 miles an hour for 20 minutes. But again, it's a recognition of the Efficient Building Fund, Commercial PACE program, and the business model that we have in the infrastructure bank of delivering leverage capital into these transactions.
Congratulations.
I just wanted to quickly circle back to the National Climate Assessment and recognize that the research that was done on the emergency department, key-related emergency department visits was, Julia was a co-author from her time at the Department of Health, and so it was great to see research that's coming out of the agencies and out of our work here, recognizing the National Climate Assessment, and also that it's underlining that heat is an important public health issue in Rhode Island.
Yeah, and I was excited to see it highlighted in the national report. And Laura, I was going to ask you on the HESs, don't you need support for additional funding for those?
We do.
Yeah. So they're really
I've been
important.
pitching these as
Yeah.
pilots
Yeah.
that we're really learning about the process, and we'll be doing then some other work to educate and the other HESs about the issue with the idea that we're looking for funding to expand the other health equity zones. We're also anticipating new health equity zones coming online next year, and then to be able to continue this work after the funding runs out in September. So they're getting a small pot of money to do a lot of work, and with the hope that we buy more. So yeah, that's an important piece.
If there's no other announcements, I'm going to first say that if people have ideas, we are going to put together, as I mentioned, dates, but we also are looking to put together at least a game plan for our 2019 year. So Elizabeth Stone, who I think everyone knows is a point person, as people have ideas for agenda items and how we're approaching our various responsibilities of the Resilient Rhode Island Act. I wanted to put Lisa Richardson on the spot for 1 sec, because and so as we start the public comment period, one of the issues on resiliency that we wanted to talk about early in 2019 was some of the work that you started and we helped to fund on the Patuxent River, looking at the Situate Reservoir. Can you just give just a little teaser for us on what we're going to be talking about there, because a lot of work has gone into that.
Basically, the climate has changed. The use of water around the state has changed. And the original design of the Situate Reservoir for water supply is now somewhat of a concern when it comes to flooding. And so flowing full all the time is not necessarily an asset. And it is, can be, the models are showing that if we, as full as everything is right now, we could get another 8-inch rainstorm. It could be potentially challenging to the state. So, but the good news is that we have some really, we're working on some ideas about how to provide safe water, and the models are showing as well as how to mitigate or protect downstream as much as possible, and we're really looking forward to kind of laying that out to you, and maybe even trying to find the win-wins in the situation. So.
Great. So that, I think it'll be, some of you may remember that earlier, a few years ago, we put some funding into that, or we supported it, coming from HUD, and I think that's going to be really interesting and very specific, concrete way that we can improve resiliency and prevent risk in the state with the flooding. So we'll schedule that for early in 2019. It's great. Others who have public comments. I know, Meg, you have your hand up, and Simmons, I know you have. Okay. Meg, go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
And everyone could just stand up and speak loudly and tell everyone who you are.
Meg Kerr, Audubon Society of Rhode Island. And a couple of quick comments. Thank you, Janet and EC4 for the schedule and for the focus on tracking metrics. I think that's really important. I wanted to make sure that you're aware that the City of Providence already has a dashboard for tracking their sustainability metrics, a great model, I think. And as you noted early on, there's a bunch of us spending a lot of time thinking about the siting issues related to our renewable energy. So I'm wondering, as you're doing your tracking, whether you could be tracking the siting as well as the carbon sequestration questions, so that we're paying attention to that as part of the tracking. And the goals, what is our ultimate goal? Probably zero carbon, but making sure that's all part of the tracking. So it tells the whole story of what we're trying to do with our renewable energy. Thanks. Thank you.
I'm Timmons Roberts from YSD Brown for Providence Society. I want Ben Gross and Angie Kim to stand up, please. So these are students in my lab in computer science and applied math who are in my climate and development lab, who have this. When you have that kind of capacity in your lab group that works on climate change, it would be a shame not to build a dashboard. So we just went ahead and built a dashboard. I've been we've been 4.5 years since the passage of the Resilient Rhode Island Act. and I've been saying a lot, we need to have a dashboard. And really built it largely on the model of Hawaii, the Aloha Challenge, which is 5 indicators of mitigation, 5 indicators of adaptation was the model that we put forward. This was not really ready for rollout, but when I saw this on the agenda late last week and we were in DC, they pulled together a little report and we have some screenshots. They built a really nice looking dashboard. So what it had, I only brought 12 copies. That's what my printer was able to do while I was running out the door this morning for other meetings. But we have, these are just indicative indicators. I mean, if you have to boil all the complexity that you all have talked about, and I want to appreciate all the work that's going on, and probably the frustration at having to boil it down to 5 indicators. But that's, you can have 5 indicators up front and then have behind those all the complexity you want. So that's the model in the Aloha Challenge, and the one that's also used by Providence that Matt just mentioned. So, I think it's really important for us to have tracking that's public, that's very understandable, that's boiled down to things that people care about, and some kind of process is what we would hope, a public process that really has community input to come up with indicators that are the ones that people want to know. And of course, we also want this to be a decision support tool for you all as you make decisions on what's working, what's maybe not working as well, where we're getting our biggest impact. Our indicators on here are things just like CO2 emissions, clean energy jobs, transportation, percent of renewables in Rhode Island electricity, average per capita fuel use in dollars, and so on. And on the adaptation side, they're really rough and ready. We didn't really get, and they didn't get to actually develop that, and so they've gone looking for some of the data and populated it with some data. Of course, much of it is, as was discussed, a couple of years old.
That's fantastic.
So I just basically, after years of saying we need a dashboard, I just thought, well, let's just, maybe make a pilot and offer again to work with you all. And we've also been talking with the Citizens Alliance for a Cooler Rhode Island about, what would be useful in this area and what the roles are. But in other words, there is a lot of interest from the civil society side in the dashboard. What did I forget? Okay. I want to thank them for this work. It's really exciting to see it come together. And again, this was not really ready for rollout, but I thought it would be a good thing to bring it to this meeting given the
I agree.
So,
and that's fantastic.
I
So
hope
we
you all
resource that
understand
brilliant
that.
students
And
to
again,
work on it as they did at Rhode Island. Thank you.
thank you all. Any questions?
So could you send that electronically?
Yes, I will be happy to send it electronically. I see that right now on my cell phone coverage. So I'll send it to
Janet.
Liz.
Or Liz, yes, yeah. And you're saying it's not ready for prime time, but we can share this as a draft, and you want input,
Yes,
feedback?
it's very clear that this is a draft that we, that we're open to all kinds of feedback and we want to work with you all.
Great, thank you. Yes.
Hi, Pete Galvin. I'm very brief, Janet. Great meeting. Pretty interesting stuff. I just hope you can get permission, you and Carol, from your boss to, as you're doing this mitigation dashboard, tracking stuff based on the existing law in Rhode Island, the goals, maybe you can get it okay to run parallel to that. What this would look like if we were going to clean up all our emissions by 2030. That's what the new IPCC report is setting out there for the world. China may be not doing it, and Utah and Montana may not be doing it, but the governor needs to make that decision. It doesn't have to be in stone, it just has to be, you guys run in parallel, let's see what it looks like. I believe NESCAM tried something like that a couple of years ago, but concluded, well, it's just not possible. Well, today we look at things differently, and so I hope that's possible. And I hope that she will also follow that by a short statement in her State of the State message in January, talking to the public and saying, folks, things have changed. This is real. It's gotten more real. And we really need to begin to get our heads around that. both in resilience and especially in mitigation. So bear with us as we go down that path, because that's where we need to be. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. Kai Sandler from Green Energy Consumers Alliance. I want to start out by thanking the EC4 and Janet, Carol, Nick for responding to stakeholder comment. It's really great to see mitigation back on the agenda and tracking considered seriously. I especially enjoyed hearing about the tracking that we're seeing on the adaptation side, and I hope that we can get to that point on the mitigation side. Moving on from tracking, I want to address two brief things on the mitigation side of things. Nick, thanks for the presentation. I think things are looking good on the electricity side. There's a lot of exciting things. We're very happy to be involved in power sector transformation. We're proud of the efficiency in the state. But I want to talk about thermal and transportation. As Nick said, we don't have clear answers on those sides right now. In terms of thermal, I think we need to start doing that planning. We heard a little bit of power sector transformation in efficiency planning so far that we want to see heat pumps through the efficiency programs. I think we have to broaden the policy solutions and also broaden the conversation broader than just OER and National Grid. We need a plan on buildings and building electrification now. On transportation, again, people are talking about it, there's work being done, but there needs to be more. And again, I will remind everyone that the Drive Electric Vehicle Fund has been empty for well over a year now. There's no plans to refund that, and we have to be getting more people using EVs now. Cars last 20 years. The cars that are bought today are still going to be on the road in 10, 15, 20 years. This isn't something that we wait. Thanks so much again.
Thank you. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you. I'm a believer in no surprises. So now I will tell you what I'm up to, so there are no surprises. So, as everyone knows, 2019 will be the 5th anniversary of the Mosaic Rhode Island Act. We all know that. So then it becomes, well, shouldn't we conduct an assessment of what the Mosaic Rhode Island Act has done? And I've had the pleasure of reading all your reports, all your minutes of your meetings, including the staff meetings, and I'm preparing that assessment.
Thank you.
And it's going to tell an important story. It's going to show what's been accomplished here, and really, as you talk about it, what remains to be done. Because we've had an interesting run of the last 5 years, and we're going to have an even more interesting run going forward. And it's useful to have an external assessment, and that's what is a priority at this very moment with our Citizens Alliance, is to provide that as a public-facing document. No surprises to you, but you say, yeah, this is what in fact has happened, and here's where we've identified what's really the ongoing agenda. So that's in the offer. Stay tuned. We'll be out before the snow gets real heavy.
That's actually, thank you. Perfect timing as we look at the agenda setting for 2019.
Yeah.
So
That's exactly what it's supposed to be useful for, and it's good that it comes from the outside, an outside set of eyes looking at it rather than just a self-analysis. And that has, of course, a number of benefits. So,
thank you.
You didn't introduce yourself.
Campaign. But Janet said my name, so I didn't. I'm probably a little infamous among some of people.
A little. So little. I don't think you can be a little. Did anyone else for public comment?
Nick Webster, Acadia Center, just also want to reiterate our support for bringing down the transportation sector emissions, one through increased use of public transportation and increasingly clean public transportation, and also the DRIVE program. We urge the administration to restore, plus up, remodel the whole program so that we can get more Rhode Islanders driving electric vehicles, move the technologies there, and it's a really good, easy way to attack that problem. So just wanted to double on those comments.
Yeah.
Tim Salenza from Rhode, from now defunct Coalition for Transportation Choices. I do think it's really important to understand that the transportation issue is a built environment issue. It's not transforming our vehicles. So even if we change to electrical system, you could still build garages, roads, which are sources of greenhouse gas emissions, and also sources of inequity in the system. People in low-income communities are usually not going to be able to afford these kind of vehicles and or participate in the subsidies that they get. I do think it's the built environment is a larger issue. We are embedded in a way of moving and transporting ourselves and our goods that needs to be looked at in the framework of this is a climate change issue, not just the trend technology. So it is a significant way to think about it.
Thank you. Anybody further? Then, great meeting, and excited about the new year, excited about working with all of the brain power and talent and ideas in this room, and great to have Brown students involved.